Shalom, I'm Batya.
And I'm Mottle.
And this is
Stuff You Should Know. It's all that stuff that you always wanted to know. You thought you should know. You're Jewish. Maybe you should know. Maybe you should know this. Maybe you should know this already. It's weird that it's on. We're doing this on video also.
We are doing this in video from our home studio in the hills of
From
Judea.
Our home studios in the hills of Judea.
We like to say that.
We like to say that, and there's something cool about that. And this and this is it. And oh wow, it's there we are. What are we talking about this week, Batya?
We are talking about something that most Jews should know at some point in their lives.
Something that we've all been there.
Well, most of us, some of our listeners maybe have not yet, but
all of our listeners, I hate to contradict you here. All of our listeners have been born.
That's true.
That's true. All of you
but
have been babies.
They didn't have to know
Some of you, like me, are still babies.
They didn't have to know anything.
That's true. You don't need to know anything as a Jewish baby.
This is stuff you should know if you're going to have a new baby.
If you're going to have a new baby.
If you know someone who's going to have a new baby and you want to know what's going on.
But you don't have to know anything. If there's Jewish babies listening, you guys don't know anything. If you actually are having a new baby, we would like to say to you,
B'sha'a tova.
B'sha'a tova, that it should happen in a good time. So we don't go screaming mazel tov yet, traditionally.
Not yet, no. Because when you're pregnant with a baby, you don't want to be jinxing stuff.
Well, jinxing? We're a superstitious people here. But like when you think about this,
we really are.
We really are. But when you think about it, we're an ancient people, the Jewish people. And it's only recently in human history that infant mortality has gone down to the point where we take it for granted these days.
I think in Israel it's the lowest infant mortality in the world, possibly.
Is it really?
I think so.
It's down to like it used to be really high. It used to be that if you were having a baby, there was a very good chance the baby wasn't going to make it, the mother wasn't going to make it. So we take that into consideration still to this day. So there's a couple things that we do. One
of the things we don't do is we don't do baby showers customarily.
We don't do baby showers. And again, take this with a grain of salt. We're talking traditionally what happens in Jewish circles. If you're having a baby shower later on this afternoon,
don't go canceling it.
Don't go canceling it. But it's nice to have that awareness and that concept that we don't take it for granted that this is just bound to happen. And the idea is, God forbid, poop.
God forbid.
You have a bunch of baby stuff and something goes south.
Right.
So, Banti, there isn't really a Jewish way to have babies.
There's not really a Jewish way to have babies, but I do want to say
the most universal thing that there is.
In my chick sitter.
In your chick sitter?
Yes. There are these beautiful blessings for a mother on her labor, during labor, that she can say that
prayers,
are really powerful.
There are specific prayers that have been written by women. We should add this. We should add this to our listeners also, because if you've listened to the Shabbat episode, all of that goes out of the window. In fact, one of my favorite halachot, one of my favorite Jewish laws about the Sabbath that I think really shows the sanctity of life, if you are a woman who is giving birth, you're in labor, and you're blind, right? You can't see any. I mean, our listeners know what blind means. And you ask someone to turn on a light for you. And the guy's like, well, she's blind. I just tell her I turned on the light. You are allowed to turn on that light. All the rules of Shabbat go out the window. It is still considered such a life or death moment that you have to. Everything else is out of the way. If there's one thing about the birth, the whole thing is protecting the person giving birth and
protecting the life.
But
baby. Also it might be helpful for the light to be on for the other people in the room who are helping the blind woman give birth.
Yeah, you know what? Go ahead, turn the light on. Turn on that light. So now you've had the baby. Now you go ahead and say, Mazel Tov. You had the baby. This is fantastic. It's a new baby. It's a new life in the world. How exciting is that?
It's so exciting.
So
my gosh. We got to do that 3 times.
We got to do that 3 times. What do you... No, next round is going to be grandkids. What do you do, Batya? What happens next?
Well, we know we have to wait 8 days because
if it's a boy,
right? Because we
don't
want
cut
that
anything off of girls.
Boy to have a Shabbos before his bris.
Right. That's where I never knew that before prepping for this show, that one of the main reasons that's given to wait 8 days is that if you have 8 days, you have at least one Shabbat in the world.
Right. What you did know was that during that Shabbat, we have a special gathering at the home of the newborn.
At the home of the newborn, if it's a boy, they have a thing called a Shalom Zachar, a welcoming the son. And if it's a girl, we have
a Shalom Bat.
A Shalom Bat. And in many communities, that's what they do. It's welcoming the daughter. It's like the community gets, it's really, I think it's more for the father.
It's more for the father.
The baby doesn't care. And I think most times the mom, would be maybe
pretty wiped out.
It's pretty wiped out and might be happier to not have a house full of people.
Right. There are foods that are specifically traditionally served during this Shalom Zachar or Shalom Bat also.
Chickpeas and beer.
Why?
Well, there's this idea. So there's been all sorts of things that have been brought up. One is that chickpeas are round, and round represents the circle of life. And I've never heard an explanation for the beer. I think there was a community that used to just have a lot of extra chickpeas and beer. I mean, a lot. That's probably, I'm sure there's a deeper Kabbalistic reason behind it for that. But know that if you're throwing a Shalom Zachar or a Shalom Bat,
get some chickpeas and some
beer. Get
some
chickpeas and beer. And when people ask you, why do you do this? Be like, well,
that's what my people
do. That's what we do. That's what we do. Chickpeas and beer. Tell them to listen to this podcast and they still won't know.
So, Mottle, if you have a baby girl, then that sometimes is when the baby girl is named. After that Shabbos celebration, the next day at shul, the father's traditionally called up to the Torah.
He's called up to the Torah. A special prayer called a Mishaberach is read for the mother and the baby. And at that time, if it's a baby girl, quite often the baby girl is named at that moment.
If she hadn't received her name before,
right? She could get named anytime when you take the Torah out, and so sometimes if you have a baby on a Sunday, some people will name the baby on a Monday. Some people will name, you read the Torah Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat. It's nice to save it up for Shabbat because all the people were there, and then they scream Mazel Tov. The Gabbai, or in English it's called a beetle. I don't know where that comes from, but reads this prayer, and part of that is she will forever be called within the people of Israel, and you say the name.
And we actually did one not on Shabbos because we had to get buses. We did it
on Rosh Chodesh. We rented an armored bus and went to the grave of Rachel.
And we named our daughter
the Rachel.
The
Rachel. Which means
I was homesick, but you were there with all our friends.
With all of our friends, which means Nechama is the consolation of Rachel.
It's such a beautiful story how you came up with her name.
The idea was that, and this is a nice thing about names, is there's so much meaning behind them. That Rachel, of all the matriarchs, is considered the one who was in most pain about the Jewish people being exiled from Israel. And the prophet Jeremiah, there's this whole scene in the book of Jeremiah where he sees a vision of Rachel, and she's crying for her children that are in exile. And he says to her, Rachel, dry your eyes, your crying's not for nothing, that there will come a day, Vishavu banim ligvulam, your children will return to their borders. And that pasuk, that verse, stayed with us so much after we had made Aliyah, and when we had our first daughter, the first child that was born in 2,000 years in the land of Israel here, and we wanted to give her a special name. So we traveled to Kever Rachel, to the grave of Rachel, and it was on Rosh Chodesh where you read the Torah, and we named her, like I said, Nechama Rachel, the consolation of Rachel. Because the ultimate consolation of a mother who's crying for her children not being there is when they come home.
When they come home.
Yeah,
which is
it was nice.
So
it was
nice.
so nice. It was, yeah.
And not to forget Sarah. It was
She was
Yom
named
Kippur.
for my mom, though. So
She was named for
that's
your
the
mom.
other. That's another big thing that people often do.
Right. The baby naming is something we could talk about also, that Ashkenazim and Sephardim name differently.
Right. The Ashkenazim often name, and for those of you listening to this podcast, you probably have had experience with this where someone's like, we're naming him for my aunt. You know what drives me a little nuts? And I don't want to say it drives me nuts, but there really isn't something like we need a B name. Like we need, like, her name was Batya. We're not going to call her Batya. Let's face it. Like who knows, something like that.
It's a beautiful name.
So we'll name her, Betty or something like that. That happened for a long time, but like good Jewish name. Our kids only really have Jewish names. Sephardi tradition is it's quite often named for someone who's still alive. Ashkenazim don't tend to do that. Ashkenazim is considered like bad luck. Again, back to the superstition thing.
Right. Mottle, at the Bris itself, there seems to be a lot of people doing a lot of different things.
Right. Well, I mean, Jews like to do this. We like to give different honors to people.
Giving out honors is a big thing.
It's a big thing, and there's a bunch that are given. Run us through the list, Batya.
Well, you start pretty much with the kvaters, because they're the first ones that are actually doing anything. And they're usually a husband and wife team. And the mother of the baby hands off the baby to the woman. She hands it to her husband, and the husband takes the baby up to be circumcised.
Well, and sometimes there's a lot of them, so it's baby to baby to baby
well,
to baby.
for us, we gave an honor to everybody we've ever met. So it was a whole line of people.
Right, it was like a relay race.
Yeah,
people like that, and you pass the baby down, and it's kind of nice if you're not so worried about germs and things like and things like that. And then it's brought up. And then there is what's called the Kisei Eliyahu, the seat of Elijah the prophet. Now, Elijah, he kind of made a big mistake in the Tanakh. He said, like, look, the Jewish people, they have hit such a low level, there might not be any Jewish people left anymore in the world. And the way the story goes, God's like, well, I'll tell you what. Not only are there going to be Jewish people left forever, you're going to have to go to every single bris of every single Jew. And that's why traditionally Elijah the prophet.
Every single Seder?
And every single Seder. That's, that's...
The cup is there. The
cup is there. The chair is there. So there's a special chair set aside, and there is a person that's given the honor of taking the baby and placing the baby on the chair of Elijah. And a person is given the honor to place the baby on the chair of Elijah. And quite often synagogues will have a special chair for this purpose.
Very ornate and beautiful and tall.
Large chair, tall chair, everyone can see. At that point, what happens next here?
Well, what about the role of the sandik?
So the sandik it's kind of like the godfather. It's like the person taking spiritual responsibility for the child. It is given to somebody. I've seen it given to two different kinds of people usually. Often it's given to a grandfather.
Right. And
then quite often it is given to the rabbi of the family, a rabbi or a big rabbi that's there, a Rosh Yeshiva, or somebody, and it's considered really one of the biggest honors in the entire Jewish world to be a tzaddik.
And
they hold the baby.
The tzaddik's holding the baby. I mean, not always, right? But
no, always. The baby is placed on the lap of the tzaddik.
And he's right there watching
He's
everything
right
that's
there, literally bird's eye view. Well, I mean, the real important person besides the baby there
would be the moil. Yeah.
So the moil's the one that does the actual cutting.
Isn't it really supposed to be the father?
Yeah, you're right. It's supposed to be the father. And where does it come from? Where's the first time circumcision is done in the Torah?
Wasn't done to a son from a father. It was Abraham.
It was Abraham, and
doing it to himself.
Right. We don't encourage that at all anymore. But he also does it to his son Ishmael, who's 13 at the time, and then does it to his son Isaac on the 8th day. As a father, and not being an expert, and And really, you want this done well.
You want it done right.
You want a professional doing this. You don't want someone dabbling, trying to figure out how to do this. So traditionally, we hire somebody who does this for a living, and he is called a moil.
But there's a way a father can if he wants to.
Well, here's what you see it quite often. I chose not to do this option because, I trust in professionals, and so the foreskin is placed. I wonder if we're going to lose our clean rating for talking about this here. Our foreskin, the foreskin is placed in a clamp, and what happens is the blade is run over the clamp. So once it's in the clamp, it's easy to remove. So quite often, what will happen is the moil will get it all ready, get it all set up, get it placed there, and the father will run the blessing. But you say the father does have to say the blessing. The blessing is Baruch Atah Hashem. Blessed art you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with commandments and commanded us regarding the Brit Milah. And then the second blessing recited is the blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with our commandments and commanded us to enter him into the covenant of Abraham, our father. And I think this is the really important part of a Brit Milah, is because, let's face it, when you bring your own kid there, when you bring your son there, it's a stressful thing. And I look around and I realize what calms me down when I'm at a Brit is that every man has had this done in here. Every man has had that at a certain moment. He's been in the synagogue. He's been brought as a baby.
Okay. They're here,
and they're all okay, more or less. They're all doing all right. The crowd then responds that just as he was entered into the covenant, may he be brought to Torah, chuppah, and maisim tovim. That may he enter into Torah, the learning of Torah, the living of Torah. May he be brought to marriage. We're already talking about marriage, at the Bris. And may he live a life of doing good deeds.
Amen.
Amen.
Very nice.
All right. For a girl, again, nothing gets cut off. It's a lot easier. Often, for a young girl, you'll have a kiddush after Shabbat. So on the Shabbat that she's given her name, you have a kiddush, but when it's a baby boy, it's done on the same day.
There's a festive meal afterwards. Everybody's gathered together. Sometimes it's a hall near the shul or
right.
A room in the shul.
And that's where you
synagogue.
Pull out the bagels or the cold cuts and everyone eats. Then the father will give a little speech or the rabbi will say something nice. It's a nice thing, and usually you have to knock these out before work. So often it'll be early in the morning. You try and it has to be done before sunset,
right?
And it's done as
usually after morning prayers.
And
then there's some sort of breakfasty thing.
Breakfast, yeah. Usually it's a breakfast these days. So Batya, is that it? We're done with it. Now we have a Jewish baby, and we're ready to move on?
For the most part, but there is another thing we should cover, and that's a Pidyon HaBen.
So the Pidyon HaBen, right? And this is important. There's a biblical idea that your first male child doesn't really belong to you. That he belongs to the nation of Israel. And so really you're supposed to take him and give him to the high priest, and he's supposed to help out there and do this. So today, since we don't do that, what we do is
we don't give him away.
We don't give him
right.
away. We buy him back. So there's an idea that you bring. So you have to have a Kohen, right, which is a descendant of Aaron, the first high priest. And
often with the last name
often with
Cohen.
The last name Cohen, often with the last name Katz. There's a whole bunch of but what's amazing is these are really the descendants of, there's always which means your father and fathers, and they have like really strong traditions that go back thousands of years. And often recently with genetic testing, they've found that these actually are
The Kohanim.
Right, there's a tag
from temple
on there
times.
from the temple times. So anyway, you have a Kohen there, and again, it's another excuse for another party. And you bring the baby out on a tray, and people put like I know you're laughing.
Potatoes.
No, not potatoes. People put jewelry and you pay 7 pruta. You pay the you're basically saying to the Kohen, to the priest, this child really belongs to you, but we would like to buy him back. And that's what Pidyon HaBen means, redeeming of your son. And that's still done to this day. Today it's done symbolically, but it's,
it's an excuse for a party.
It's an excuse for the party. I keep telling my son we're gonna give him back to give him to the temple, and if he doesn't straighten up, they'll straighten him right out.
He's a good kid. Right?
Anyway, I think what's important to know is that we do a lot of things around having a child, having a baby, because family is so central to Jewish life. So much of what we do and so much of what we talk about is what do we do for the next generation? There's an idea in Judaism, we're not just here for ourselves. We're here to make a difference and to do something. And what we have in the world, our riches, our wealth, is really what our kids are going to bring into the world. Raising kids to be good people, to be good Jews, to make a difference in the world doesn't start when, in first grade. It doesn't start when they go off to college. It doesn't start when they leave their house. It starts the moment they're born. We start with educating them the moment they're born, and we start with bringing them into Jewish rituals, into this covenant of this agreement between God and the Jewish people and their community.
Community is a huge part of it. I see that each of these things just brings us together, brings our communities together, and binds us.
So my advice to you folks, go have Jewish children. Go do that, and
we've enjoyed it.
We've enjoyed it. We've had a great time with that. And if you really want to educate them, have them listen a little bit to stuff Jews should know. All right, Batya, that's it for today. Thanks for listening, folks.
Shalom, shalom.